My mother threw an empty suitcase at me during a blizzard the year I turned 19, screaming, "If you're so smart, then pay your own bills." I had exactly $42 and an expired student ID to my name. She forgot that bills always come due. 10 years later, I returned, not to pay for their utilities, but to inform them I had acquired the bank holding their mortgage. Today, I am here to foreclose. My name is Ariel Winslow, and at 19 years old, I had already learned that blood was not thicker than water. It was just harder to scrub out of the carpet. The night my life actually began started like a suffocation. Outside, the Chicago wind was howling, a low, mournful sound that rattled the single-pane windows of our suburban colonial house. Inside, the air was hot, smelling of roasted garlic, cheap champagne, and the overwhelming stench of unwarranted self-congratulation. I was sitting at the wobbly kitchen table, my back hunched over the skeletal remains of a laptop I had salvaged from a recycling center 3 weeks prior. It was a pathetic machine, the casing cracked and the fan wheezing like an asthmatic lung. But it was mine. I had a soldering iron in one hand and a magnifying glass in the other, trying to bypass a fried capacitor on the motherboard. While I performed surgery on silicon, my family was in the adjacent dining room, toasting to mediocrity. "To Preston," my father bellowed, his voice booming with a pride he had never once directed at me. The newest junior associate at Miller & Associates. I could hear the clink of glasses. My brother, Preston, was 22 years old. He had barely scraped through a state college with a degree in business administration. A degree he had mostly purchased with our parents' retirement savings and cheating off his girlfriend's papers. The internship he had just landed was not due to his acumen. It was because our father played golf with the hiring manager on Sundays. "Thanks, Dad," Preston said, his voice slick and oily. He strolled into the kitchen to refill his glass, leaning against the counter in his new suit that cost more than my entire semester's tuition at the community college. He looked at me, at the wires and chips spread out on the table, and sneered. "Still playing with trash? Ariel, Jesus, you look like a mechanic. It is embarrassing." I did not look up. I carefully applied a bead of solder. "It is called hardware repair. Preston, something you would have to pay a Geek Squad technician $200 to do." "I have people for that," he scoffed, taking a sip of his drink. "Just like I have people to clean the toilets. Which, by the way, is probably where you are headed with that community college degree." "What is it again?" "Computer science. You know they outsource that stuff to India for pennies, right? You are wasting your time." "I am building something," I said, my voice tight. "And I work 2 jobs. Preston, I pay for my own classes." "2 jobs," he laughed, a cruel barking sound. "Flipping burgers and stocking shelves. A real tycoon. You are a freeloader, Ariel, living here rent-free while I am out there building a career." My mother, Linda, bustled into the kitchen then, carrying a stack of dirty plates. She was wearing her pearls, the ones she only brought out when she wanted to pretend we were upper class. Her face was flushed with wine and agitation. She slammed the plates into the sink, sending a spray of soapy water onto my arm. "Ariel, move your junk," she snapped. "We need the table for the cake. Honestly, cannot you see we are celebrating? Why do you always have to be such a dark cloud?" "I am just fixing my computer." "Mom," I said, wiping the water off my arm. "I need it for my project. The code for the logistics algorithm needs to be compiled tonight." "Logistics," she mocked, mimicking my tone. "Algorithm. Speak English. Girl, you are just playing video games." Just then, my father walked in, holding a white envelope that had been sitting on the hallway credenza. His face, previously flushed with joy, was now darkening into a shade of purple I associated with the first of the month. "Linda," he said, waving the paper, "have you seen this? The electric bill came. It is past due. And look at this amount, $350. $350. The room went silent. In our house, money was a volatile substance, explosive when touched. We projected wealth to the neighbors. But behind closed doors, we were always robbing Peter to pay Paul. My mother snatched the bill, her eyes scanning the numbers. Then, her gaze snapped to me. It was immediate, instinctive. I was the scapegoat for every misfortune that befell the Winslow household. "It is her," Linda hissed, pointing a manicured finger at my laptop. "It is that machine. She leaves it on all day and night. It is sucking the power right out of the walls." "Mom, that is impossible," I argued, finally setting down my soldering iron. I stood up, feeling the exhaustion of my double shift earlier that day weighing on my bones. A laptop uses less electricity than a light bulb. The bill is high because the insulation in the attic is rotting and we run the heat at 75 degrees. "Do not talk back to your mother," my father shouted. He slammed his hand on the counter. "She is right. You are always on that thing, beep-booping away, wasting time, wasting electricity." "I am not wasting time," I pleaded, desperation creeping into my voice. I turned the laptop around, showing them the screen filled with lines of code. "Look, this is Nexus Flow. It is a software I am writing to optimize shipping routes for local trucking companies. I have a meeting with a potential client next week. If this works, I could sell the license for $5,000, maybe more." My father looked at the screen as if it were written in alien hieroglyphs. He let out a snort of derision. $5,000. For typing. "Do not make me laugh. Ariel, you are dreaming. You need to get your head out of the clouds. Girls like you should be looking for a husband, or at least a job with a steady paycheck, not inventing whatever this nonsense is." "It is not nonsense," I insisted. "It is the future. Supply chain management is a billion-dollar industry." "You are boring us," Preston interjected. He was leaning forward, a malicious glint in his eyes. He saw the tension, and like a shark sensing blood, he wanted to escalate it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an empty wallet. He frowned, putting on a theatrical performance of confusion. "Hey," Preston said, patting his pockets. "Wait a minute. I had $50 in here. I just went to the ATM this morning to get cash for the cab later." He looked around the room, and then, slowly, his eyes locked on me. "You took it," he said. It was not a question. "What?" I recoiled. "I did not touch your wallet. I left it on the counter when I came in," Preston lied smoothly. "You have been sitting here the whole time. You are the only one who could have taken it." "I did not take your money, Preston," I shouted. "You probably spent it on those vape pods you hide in your car or lost it. Do not you dare accuse your brother of lying," my mother shrieked. She stepped forward, invading my personal space. "He is a professional. He does not need to lie. But you are always complaining about being broke. You are jealous of him. You wanted to ruin his night, didn't you?" "I work 2 jobs." I yelled back, my hands balling into fists. "Why would I steal $50? I make that in a shift." "Because you are a sneak," Linda screamed. "Give it back. Give him the money right now." "I do not have it." My mother grabbed my backpack from the floor and dumped it out. Textbooks, a tangled charger, and a few loose tampons spilled onto the linoleum. No money. But that did not vindicate me. In her eyes, my lack of possession just meant I had hidden it better. "It is in your room, then," she spat. "You hid it in your room. Check her pockets," Preston goaded, taking a bite of a cookie. "She probably has it on her." "I am not letting you search me," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "I am 19 years old. I am an adult. I pay for my food. I pay for my gas. I pay for my tuition." "You live under my roof," my father roared. "You eat my food. You use my heat. You use my electricity." "I barely eat here," I countered. "And I just told you, the computer does not use that much power." "I am sick of your excuses," Linda shouted. Her face was twisted, ugly, with a resentment that had been festering for years. She grabbed the power cord of my laptop and yanked it from the wall. The screen went black. "Mom, stop!" I lunged forward. But my father blocked me. "You think you are so special," Linda yelled. She was panting, her chest heaving. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated loathing. "You think because you can read a few books and type on a computer that you are better than us, better than your brother." "I never said that," I whispered. "You think you do not need us," she continued, her voice rising to a fever pitch. "You think you can just sit here and judge us while we support you." Then, she said it, the words that would echo in my mind for the next decade. She pointed at the door, her eyes wide and manic. "If you are so smart, then pay your own bills." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Preston looked a little surprised by the volume of her scream. "You want to be a big shot?" she seethed. "Fine, do it somewhere else. I want you out. Tonight." "Linda," my father started, perhaps thinking of what the neighbors would say. But she cut him off. "No, I am done. Howard, she is a thief and a liar and a burden. She either drops this college nonsense and gets a real job at the factory to pay us rent, real rent, $600 a month, or she gets out." She looked at me, waiting for me to crumble, waiting for the tears, waiting for the apology. She wanted me to beg. She wanted me to promise to be the obedient, invisible servant she had always tried to mold me into. I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the lines of bitterness etched around her mouth. I saw the fear in my father's eyes, a weak man dominated by a hateful woman. I saw the smirk on Preston's face, the brother who would burn me alive just to keep himself warm. Something inside me snapped, not a break, but a release. A tether that had been holding me to this sinking ship was severed. I did not cry. My tear ducts felt arid, dried up by years of neglect. I felt a strange, cold clarity wash over me. "Okay," I said. My mother blinked. "What?" I said okay. I did not argue. I did not defend myself against the theft I did not commit. I simply turned around and walked out of the kitchen. I could feel their eyes on my back. I walked up the stairs to my small bedroom. The room that had never really felt like mine. I did not have a suitcase. Preston had borrowed mine for a spring break trip 2 years ago and returned it with a broken wheel and a ripped zipper. It was useless. I went to the closet and pulled out a roll of heavy-duty black trash bags. I moved with mechanical precision. I did not pack everything. I left the childhood teddy bear. I left the high school yearbook. I left the dress I wore to prom, the one I had bought from a thrift store because they would not give me money. I only took what was vital. My clothes went into one bag, my toiletries into a smaller plastic sack, my coding books, heavy and dense, went into the bottom of a second bag. I wrapped my laptop in a thick sweater and placed it gently on top. That machine was my lifeline. It was the only thing in this world that did exactly what I told it to do. I put on my heavy winter coat, my scarf, and my boots. I looked around the room one last time. It looked like a guest room now. Impersonal, empty. I carried the bags downstairs. The family had moved into the living room. The television was on. They were pretending everything was normal. They thought I was bluffing. They thought I would walk to the end of the driveway, get cold, and come back crawling, ready to accept their terms. I opened the front door. The wind hit me like a physical blow, biting and cruel. Snow was falling in thick, heavy sheets, blanketing the suburbs in silence. "You walk out that door," my mother called out from the couch, not even turning her head. "And do not you dare come back asking for a dime. You are on your own. Ariel." I paused on the threshold. The cold air filled my lungs, sharp and purifying. "Don't worry," I said, my voice steady, carrying through the hallway. "I won't." I stepped out and closed the door behind me. The click of the latch was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I walked down the driveway, dragging my black trash bags through the snow. I had $42 in my pocket. I had no place to sleep. I had no family. The temperature was dropping, and the night was vast and dark. But as I reached the street, looking back at the house glowing with warmth that was never meant for me, I made a vow. I whispered it into the wind so the universe would hear me clearly. Next time I walk through that door, I told the darkness, I will not be the one paying the bills. I will be the one setting the price. I turned my collar up against the snow and started walking toward the bus stop. My life as a daughter was over. My life as Ariel Winslow, the architect of her own fate, had just begun. The motel room smelled of stale tobacco smoke and industrial-strength lemon cleaner, a combination that stung the back of my throat. It was the kind of place where the carpet felt damp even when it was dry, and the neon sign outside buzzed with a rhythmic, dying flicker that cast a strobing red light across the peeling wallpaper. I sat on the edge of the mattress, which sagged in the middle like a hammock, and stared at my reflection in the dark television screen. My hands were still shaking, not from the cold, although the heating unit in the corner was wheezing ineffectually against the sub-zero draft leaking through the window frame. But from the adrenaline crash, I was 19 years old, and for the first time in my life, I was truly alone. Yet, as the silence of the room settled around me, heavy and suffocating, I realized I had been alone for a very long time. The solitude of this cheap room was honest. The solitude of my childhood home had been a lie. Growing up, I was not a daughter. I was a ghost haunting the hallways of the Winslow residence. The hierarchy was established before I could even speak. There was the king, my father, the queen, my mother, and the crown prince, Preston. And then there was me, the scullery maid who had accidentally been given a seat at the dinner table. I closed my eyes and the memories washed over me, not as a single wave, but as a series of sharp, stinging cuts. I remembered the mornings the most vividly. At 7 a.m, the house would bustle with a frantic, joyous energy centered entirely on Preston. He attended St. Marcus Academy, a private institution with tuition fees that could have bought a small house every 4 years. I would watch from the top of the stairs as my mother fussed over his blazer, straightening his tie, brushing lint off his shoulders as if he were a precious artifact. She would pack his lunch with gourmet sandwiches and sliced fruit, slipping in a $20 bill for emergencies, which we all knew meant the vending machine or video games. Then, they would leave. My father would warm up the sedan, the leather seats heated to a comfortable 70 degrees, and they would drive him to the school gates. 5 minutes later, I would walk out the same door. I wore clothes from the discount bin at the local department store, usually a size too big so I could grow into them, or a size too small because they refused to replace them. I walked 3 blocks to the public bus stop, standing in the gray slush of the Chicago winter, waiting for the yellow behemoth that smelled of wet wool and teenage aggression. My lunch was whatever I could scavenge: an apple, a granola bar, or sometimes nothing at all if the pantry was low. The disparity was not just financial, it was elemental. Preston deserved warmth. I was expected to endure the cold. Preston deserved the best education money could buy. I was expected to be grateful for a textbook with half the pages missing and a teacher who was too burnt out to care. It was not that my parents hated me. Hate requires passion. Hate requires energy. What they felt for me was a profound, unshakable indifference. I was a bad investment. In their eyes, a daughter was a liability, someone to be fed and clothed until she could be handed off to a husband. A son, however, was a legacy. A son carried the name. A son was the immortality project. I remembered my 10th birthday. I came downstairs hoping for pancakes, maybe a balloon. The kitchen was empty. On the counter sat a plastic container from the supermarket bakery section. Inside was a single cupcake with pink frosting that had hardened into a sugary shell. A yellow manager's special sticker was plastered over the price tag, reducing it to 50 cents. There was no card. 6 months later, for Preston's 13th birthday, they rented out a banquet hall. They hired a DJ who played loud pop music, and there was a chocolate fountain. I stood in the corner, holding a paper plate, watching my parents beam as Preston opened gift after gift: a dirt bike, a new gaming console, a designer watch. He did not say thank you once. He just tore the paper off and tossed it on the floor for me to pick up later. I learned early on that meritocracy was a myth, at least within the walls of our home. When I was 12, I entered the citywide mathematics Olympiad. I had spent months studying, hiding under my covers with a flashlight, because my mother complained that reading too much would ruin my eyes and make me unappealing. I won first place. I brought home a trophy, a gold-painted plastic cup with my name engraved on the base. I placed it on the dining table during dinner, my heart hammering against my ribs, waiting for a good job or even a nod of acknowledgement. My father glanced at it between bites of steak. "That is nice," he said, his tone flat. "Pass the salt." My mother moved the trophy to the sideboard later that night, not to display it, but because it was cluttering the table. 2 days later, it was in a box in the garage. Yet, a week after that, Preston, who was 15 at the time and failing 3 subjects, managed to change a flat tire on his bicycle. It was a task that took him an hour and involved him stripping the nut. But when he came inside with grease on his hands, my parents acted as if he had split the atom. "Look at those hands," my father had roared, clapping him on the back. "A real man's hands. He can fix anything. Linda, he has got the engineering mind. Just like his old man." Preston had smirked at me, wiping the grease on a towel I had just washed. "See," he had said, "useful skills. Ariel, not that nerd stuff you do." That was the dynamic. His mediocrity was celebrated as genius. My excellence was tolerated as a nuisance. Preston grew up believing he was the center of the universe because my parents built a solar system that revolved around him. He became arrogant, lazy, and cruel. He learned that he could say anything, do anything, and there would be no consequences. He called me names that stripped away my humanity. Leech, parasite, ugly duckling. He would purposely trip me in the hallway and laugh when I fell. If I complained, my mother would sigh, rolling her eyes. "Oh, stop being so dramatic. Ariel, he is just teasing. Brothers do that. Toughen up." They wanted me to be tough, so I became granite. I stopped crying when I was 8. I stopped asking for things when I was 9. I stopped expecting love when I was 10. I adopted a strategy of silence and observation. I became part of the furniture. I watched how they spent money they did not have to impress people they did not like. I watched how my father lied about his business deals. I watched how my mother drank a little more wine each year to numb the reality of her fading youth. I realized I was not living with family. I was living with roommates who resented my presence. I was a tenant in my own home, paying rent in the currency of emotional abuse. My escape began in a scrapyard. I was 14, walking home from school because I had missed the bus and refused to call my mother for a ride. I cut through the local junkyard, a graveyard of rusted metal and forgotten dreams. There, sitting atop a pile of discarded microwaves and VCRs, was a computer tower. The case was dented, and the side panel was missing, exposing the green circuit boards inside. I dragged it home, hiding it under my coat. I set it up in the basement, the only place in the house where no one bothered to go. It didn't work, of course, but I was fascinated. I went to the library and checked out every book on hardware repair I could find. I found a discarded keyboard behind a school dumpster. I found a monitor at a garage sale for $2. I spent my nights in that cold basement, breathing in the smell of soldering fumes and dust. When the screen finally flickered to life, glowing with a harsh blue light, I felt a surge of power I had never experienced before. I had fixed it. I had taken something broken and made it whole. That computer became my teacher, my friend, and my weapon. I taught myself to code because code was logical. If you made a mistake in code, the program didn't yell at you or call you worthless. It just didn't run. You fixed the error, and it worked. It was fair. It was a world of pure cause and effect, a sanctuary from the chaotic injustice of my family. But even sanctuaries can be violated. The final crack in the foundation, the moment I knew I would eventually have to leave, happened during my senior year of high school. The prom was approaching. I didn't care much for the dance, but it was a rite of passage. For once, I wanted to feel normal. I wanted to feel pretty. My mother, in a rare moment of apparent generosity, had promised to buy me a dress. "We have had a good month," she had said, her voice unusually light. "Your father closed a deal. We will go to the mall this weekend. $200 limit. That is fair." "Right." I had been ecstatic. I dared to hope. I found a dress in a magazine. A simple blue chiffon gown that looked like water caught in motion. We drove to the mall on Saturday, but as we walked toward the department store, we passed the sporting goods store. Preston was standing in the window display, looking at a set of golf clubs. He was 20 then, living at home, unemployed, and finding himself. "Mom," he called out, seeing us. "Come look at this. It is the new titanium driver set. It is exactly what I need to network with the guys at the club. Dad said I need to work on my game if I want to get into real estate." My mother stopped. She looked at the dress shop. Then she looked at Preston, who was practically drooling over the clubs. "How much are they?" she asked. $600, Preston said. "But they are on sale for $450. It is a steal. Mom, seriously, this is an investment in my career." I felt the cold creeping into my stomach. "Mom," I said, my voice quiet. "The dress." She looked at me, and I saw the calculation happen in her eyes. It took her less than 3 seconds to weigh my happiness against Preston's whim. "Ariel," she said, her voice taking on that wheedling, manipulative tone I despised. "It is just a dance. It is one night. These clubs are for your brother's future. You want him to succeed, don't you? You do not want to be selfish. You promised," I said. "Do not be a brat," she snapped, the mask falling. "We cannot afford both. Preston needs this. You have that nice dress from your cousin's wedding 3 years ago. You can wear that." "That dress is pink, and it is 2 sizes too small," I said. "Then lose some weight," Preston laughed. My mother bought the clubs. I watched her swipe the credit card, smiling at the cashier, the proud mother of a son who played golf. I stood there, invisible, while Preston swung the driver in the middle of the store, nearly hitting a mannequin. That night, I did not cry. I went to the basement and wrote code until my fingers cramped. I realized then that promises from them were just words, as empty as the air they were spoken into. I was not a priority. I was not even an option. I was the budget cut. Back in the motel room. The memory faded, leaving only the bitter aftertaste of reality. I shivered and pulled my coat tighter around myself. I looked at the digital clock on the bedside table. It was 3 a.m. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the crumpled bills. $42. That was my net worth. The room cost $35 a night. I had $7 left for food. I had no degree yet. I had no references. I had a laptop that was currently dead because I'd forgotten to grab the charger in my haste. Wait. I unzipped the black trash bag. My hands scrambled through the clothes. Yes, there it was. The frayed white cord. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I plugged it into the wall socket. The familiar hum of the fans spinning up was the most comforting sound in the world. I needed money. Fast. I couldn't go back to the burger joint or the retail store. They were too close to home, and my parents would likely show up to cause a scene or demand my paycheck. I needed to disappear, and I needed to earn. I opened a text editor. I didn't have internet access here. The motel charged $10 for Wi-Fi, which I couldn't afford, but I could work offline. I had the core architecture of Nexus Flow in my head. I could refine the code, optimize the search heuristics. But code wouldn't buy breakfast. I needed a plan. I grabbed a piece of motel stationery and a dry ballpoint pen. I started to write, my handwriting jagged and furious. Goal 1. Secure shelter for the next week. 7 times 35 is $245. Impossible. Goal 2. Food, ramen, bread, water from the tap. Goal 3. Income. I stared at the third point. I was 19. I looked 12. No one would hire me for a high-level tech job. I had to go lower. I had to go underground. I remembered a forum I had stumbled upon years ago, a marketplace for freelance coding tasks that were too small or too tedious for major firms. Data entry, script debugging, hardware repair. I would have to find a free Wi-Fi spot tomorrow, the library, or the coffee shop on 5th Street if I stood outside near the window. I looked out the window at the snow piling up on the windowsill. The world was cold, indifferent, and vast. My parents thought they had punished me by throwing me into it. They thought I would freeze. They were wrong. The cold didn't scare me. I had been living in the cold for 19 years. This was just a different temperature. I turned back to the screen, the blue light illuminating my face. I wasn't the invisible child anymore. I was a ghost who had walked out of the haunted house, and now I had work to do. The motel money burned out in 3 days. Reality did not offer me a soft landing. It offered me a concrete box beneath a failing dry cleaning business in a neighborhood where the police sirens were the primary lullaby. The rent was $300 a month, paid in cash to a landlord who refused to give me his last name and looked at me as if I were a fugitive. Which, in a spiritual sense, I suppose I was. The room was subterranean and damp, the air perpetually thick with the chemical tang of perchloroethylene seeping down from the shop above. Mixed with the musty rot of water damage, my roommates were not human. They were roaches the size of my thumb that skittered across the floor whenever I turned on the single, naked bulb hanging from the ceiling, and mice that scratched inside the drywall, building empires out of insulation. I slept on a mattress I had dragged in from the alley, scrubbing it down with bleach until my hands were raw. But I still slept fully clothed, afraid of what might touch my skin in the dark. This was the bottom, but the bottom had a floor, and that meant I could push off against it. My life became a blur of exhaustion and kinetic energy. I needed money to eat, but I needed time to code, to balance this equation. I stopped sleeping more than 4 hours a night. I took on 3 jobs, creating a schedule that would have killed a weaker person, from 6 in the morning until noon. I was a bicycle courier. I rode a rusted mountain bike I had purchased for $15 at a pawn shop. The Chicago winter was relentless. The wind off the lake felt like shattered glass against my face. I delivered sandwiches to office workers in high-rises, men and women in suits who looked through me as they signed the receipts. They would complain if the soup was lukewarm, never minding that I had biked 3 miles through slush and black ice to get it there. My legs burned constantly, a dull, throbbing ache that settled deep into the muscle tissue, from 1 in the afternoon until 5. I sat in the corner of a public library or a coffee shop that was too busy to notice I had only bought a single small black coffee. Doing data entry for a sketchy online firm, they paid 2 cents per line. I typed until my carpal tunnel flared, transcribing handwritten medical records that were barely legible. It was mind-numbing work, the kind that rots the brain if you let it, but it put another $20 a day in my pocket. From 6 in the evening until 2 in the morning, I washed dishes at a 24-hour diner. The kitchen was a hellscape of steam, grease, and shouting. My hands, once calloused from cold, became sodden and wrinkled, soaking in gray dishwater filled with half-eaten burgers and soggy fries. The line cooks were rough men with prison tattoos who made lewd jokes, but I ignored them. I kept my head down, scrubbed the plates, and collected my minimum wage. My diet was strictly utilitarian. I ate for calories, not flavor. Ramen noodles were the staple, bought in bulk. I became an expert at timing the supermarket cycles. I knew exactly when the bakery threw out the day-old bread. I would wait by the loading dock, swallowing my pride, and ask the manager for the bag before it hit the dumpster. Sometimes they said yes. Sometimes they told me to get lost. On the good days, I had a bagel that was only slightly hard. On bad days, I drank tap water to trick my stomach into thinking it was full. But in the few hours between the diner shift and dawn, or during the stolen moments at the coffee shop, I was not a dishwasher or a courier. I was the CEO of a one-woman empire. I was building Nexus Flow. The idea had evolved from the simple logistics program I had started in my parents' house. I realized that the problem with shipping was not just the route, it was the variables: weather, traffic, fuel prices, driver fatigue, port congestion. Existing software treated these as static inputs. I wanted to build an algorithm that treated them as fluid, living data points. I worked with a ferocity that bordered on madness. I didn't have internet in my basement, so I had to download documentation and libraries while I was at the coffee shop, hoarding information like a squirrel gathering nuts, and then code offline in the dark. One night, sitting on the floor of my basement with my laptop balanced on a milk crate, I took a break to check social media. It was a masochistic ritual I couldn't quite break. I found Preston's profile. He had posted a photo an hour ago. He was at a club in downtown Chicago. He was holding a bottle of vodka that cost more than my entire month's rent. His arm was draped around a girl in a sequined dress, and he was laughing, his head thrown back in performative ecstasy. The caption read, "Grinding hard, playing hard. Another big week at the firm." I knew he hadn't closed a single deal. I knew my parents were likely paying for that bottle service. The injustice of it rose in my throat like bile. He was burning capital he didn't earn. While I was freezing in a basement, counting pennies to buy peanut butter, I went to close the browser, my finger hitting the trackpad with aggressive force, and then the screen went black. Not the sleep mode black, the dead black. My heart stopped. The fan, which had been whining loudly for weeks, gave a final, deathly rattle and went silent. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." I pressed the power button. Nothing. I held it down. Nothing. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. That laptop was my brain. It was my future. It held thousands of lines of code that existed nowhere else because I couldn't afford cloud storage backup fees. If the hard drive was fried, I was back to zero. I was just a dishwasher with a dream that had evaporated. I didn't cry. Crying was a luxury for people who had a safety net. I grabbed my toolkit, a small set of screwdrivers I kept in a Ziploc bag. I turned the laptop over and began to unscrew the casing. My hands were shaking, but I forced them to be steady. I needed to bypass the thermal sensor. The fan was dead, which meant the motherboard had shut down to prevent melting. If I could strip the casing off to allow air circulation and point a desk fan directly at the processor, I might be able to trick it into booting up. I worked for 2 hours under the dim light bulb. I stripped the machine down to its skeleton. I found a loose wire near the power supply, likely from when my mother had yanked the cord out of the wall that last night. I didn't have a soldering iron anymore, so I heated a paperclip over the flame of a lighter until it was red hot and used it to melt the solder just enough to reconnect the joint. It was crude, it was ugly, it was risky. I plugged it in. I held my breath. The machine whirred. A blue light flickered. The screen lit up. Nexus Flow. Project loaded. I slumped back against the cold concrete wall, my forehead slick with sweat despite the freezing temperature of the room. I had saved it, but I knew this was a warning. The hardware was dying. I needed money to buy a server, or at least a better computer. I needed to sell this software. Now, the next day, I called in sick to the courier job. I put on the only professional outfit I owned, a black blazer I had found at a thrift store, and a pair of slacks that I had ironed on the floor of the basement. I pulled my hair back into a tight bun to hide the fact that I hadn't been able to afford conditioner in a month. I went to the financial district. I had a list of 5 mid-sized logistics companies. I didn't have an appointment. I just walked into the lobbies. The first 3 attempts were humiliating. At the first company, the receptionist didn't even let me pass the front desk. She looked at my scuffed boots and my backpack and told me they were not hiring interns. At the second company, I managed to corner a manager by the elevator. I started my pitch, speaking fast about algorithmic efficiency and fuel reduction. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on my chest, and smiled a condescending, oily smile. "Listen, sweetie," he said, cutting me off. "It is cute that you know some buzzwords, but we use enterprise software from IBM. Go back to school." At the third company, I actually got a meeting because the director thought I was someone else. When he realized I was a 19-year-old girl with no degree and a laptop held together with duct tape, he laughed. "You want me to entrust my fleet of 200 trucks to a program written by a teenager in a basement?" he asked, chuckling as he checked his watch. "I admire the hustle, kid, but come back when you have a diploma and 10 years of experience. I walked out of that building feeling small. The wind bit through my blazer. I sat on a bench in the plaza, watching the pigeons peck at a discarded crust of bread. I felt a kinship with them. Scavengers. I looked at my list. The big companies were closed doors. They wanted pedigree. They wanted safety. They didn't want a revolution. They wanted insurance. I needed someone who didn't have the luxury of saying no. I needed someone who was bleeding money and would take a risk on a tourniquet, even if it was applied by a dropout. I pulled out my phone, a cracked Android with a prepaid SIM card, and searched for trucking companies near me, but filtered by the lowest ratings. I found a company called Red Route Haulage. It was located in an industrial park 5 miles south, far away from the gleaming skyscrapers. The reviews were terrible. Late deliveries, lost packages, rude drivers. I spent my last $3 on a bus ticket to get there. The office was a trailer sitting in a gravel lot filled with trucks that looked like they had seen better decades. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee and cigarette smoke. A man was sitting behind a desk buried under mountains of paper invoices. He looked exhausted. His shirt was stained, and he was rubbing his temples as if his head were about to split open. "We are not hiring drivers," he barked without looking up. "And we are not buying cookies." "I am not selling cookies," I said, stepping into the trailer. "And I know you are losing money on fuel. I can see your fleet in the yard. Half of them are idling. That is 3 gallons an hour per truck." "Wasted." The man looked up. He had dark circles under his eyes. "Who are you?" "My name is A. Stone," I said, using the pseudonym I had decided on during the bus ride. It sounded gender neutral. It sounded solid. "I have a piece of software that can optimize your route planning. It takes into account traffic patterns that your dispatchers are missing. I can cut your fuel costs by 15% in the first week." "15%, he snorted. "I have heard that before from salesmen in fancy suits. They charge $10,000 for a license." "I do not want $10,000, I said. I opened my laptop. I prayed the battery would hold. "I want you to let me run your routing for 1 day. Just 1 day. If I do not save you money, you do not pay me a dime. If I do, you pay me $500. He looked at me. He looked at the chaos on his desk. He looked at the red ink on his ledger. Desperation recognizes desperation. "1 day, he grunted. "But if you mess up my deliveries, I will sue you for everything you have got." "Deal," I said. I spent the next 8 hours in that trailer. I inputted his driver schedules, his delivery addresses, and his vehicle specs into Nexus Flow. The code churned. The algorithm ran. It spit out a new schedule. It consolidated 3 routes into 2. It rerouted a shipment to avoid a construction zone that had been causing delays for weeks. At the end of the day, the drivers came back. They were early. The fuel gauges were higher than usual. The man, his name was Frank, did the math on a calculator. He did it twice. Then he looked at me. The skepticism in his eyes was replaced by a grudging respect. "You saved me $400 in diesel today," he said quietly. "And the drivers aren't claiming overtime." "Imagine what I can do in a month," I said, keeping my face impassive, though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Frank opened a drawer. He pulled out a checkbook. He wrote a check for $500. He ripped it out and slid it across the desk. I picked it up. My fingers touched the paper. $500. It was not a fortune. To Preston, it was a bottle of vodka. To my parents, it was a set of golf clubs. But to me, standing in that trailer with my duct-taped laptop, it was validation. It was the first time in my life that someone had paid me for my mind, not my labor. It was the first brick in the fortress I was going to build. "Same time tomorrow?" Frank asked. "Same time tomorrow," I said. "But the price goes up to $1,000. Frank laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "You are a shark, kid." I walked out of the trailer into the cold night air. I held the check against my chest. I didn't take the bus home. I walked the 5 miles back to my basement. My legs didn't hurt. The wind didn't sting. I felt warm. I felt dangerous. I was still at the bottom, but I had found a foothold, and I was starting to climb. Frank was the domino that toppled the rest. In the trucking industry, news travels faster than fiber optics. It travels on the frequency of desperate men trying to save a dime. Within 30 days of installing Nexus Flow on the rusted servers of Red Route Haulage, Frank's fuel costs did not just drop, they cratered. We achieved a 30% reduction in diesel consumption. It was a statistical anomaly so significant that the IRS audited him, thinking he was laundering money. He wasn't. He was just finally driving smart. When Frank showed his books to his brother-in-law, who ran a mid-sized fleet in Gary, Indiana, the phone in my pocket started ringing. When that brother-in-law showed his quarterly savings to a regional logistics coordinator at a trade show in Detroit, the phone stopped ringing and started vibrating constantly. I moved out of the basement within 3 months. I did not move into a penthouse. I moved into the problem. I rented a derelict warehouse in the industrial district, a cavernous space of exposed brick and shattered skylights that smelled of ozone and pigeons. It was cheap, it was secure, and it was mine. I incorporated under the name Etherus Logic. It sounded ethereal, but the work we did was grounded in the grit of asphalt and shipping containers. I realized quickly that I could not scale this alone. I needed a team, but I did not want the polished graduates from Ivy League schools who had never changed a tire or worried about an overdraft fee. I wanted hunger. I wanted the people the world had discarded, just like my family had discarded me. I put out cryptic ads on hacker forums and dark web message boards, looking for problem solvers who hate rules. No degree required. Show me your code, not your diploma. They came out of the woodwork. I hired a cryptographer who had done time for penetrating a bank's firewall just to see if he could. I hired a data analyst who had been fired from a major tech firm for having severe social anxiety that made office politics impossible for him. I hired a 19-year-old girl who was living in her car, but could code in Python faster than I could speak English. We were a motley crew of social outcasts, night owls, and geniuses with chips on our shoulders. We turned that warehouse into a fortress of solitude and silicon. We worked 18 hours a day, fueled by cheap energy drinks and the intoxicating high of building something that actually worked. We were not just writing software. We were building a nervous system for the global supply chain. By the time I turned 24, Etherus Logic was no longer a rumor. We were a whispered legend in the logistics sector, but we were still swimming in the small ponds, handling regional fleets and mid-tier distributors. Then came the Great Gridlock. It started as a minor glitch in the Port Authority software of Los Angeles, a legacy system, written in the 1980s, finally groaned and collapsed under the weight of modern volume. It triggered a cascading failure. Ships were stranded at anchor, unable to dock, cranes froze, trucks lined up for 40 miles, their engines idling, waiting for cargo that could not be unloaded. The ripple effect was immediate and catastrophic. Shelves in the Midwest went empty. Factories in Detroit shut down because they missed a single shipment of microchips. Fresh produce rotted in containers, the stench wafting over the Pacific Coast Highway. The global supply chain, usually invisible, suddenly became the only thing anyone could talk about on the news. The giants of the industry, the legacy software firms, were paralyzed. Their systems were rigid, unable to adapt to the chaos. They could not reroute millions of tons of cargo in real time because their algorithms were based on historical averages. And this crisis had no history. Enter Omnimart. Omnimart was the second largest retailer in the world, a behemoth with thousands of stores and a promise of 2-day delivery that they were failing to keep. Their stock price was free-falling. Their CEO was facing a shareholder revolt. They were bleeding $50 million a day. They issued a desperate request for proposal to every tech firm in the country. They needed a solution to clear the backlog, bypass the frozen ports, and get their goods to the shelves before the holiday season was ruined. I knew this was it. This was the door kicking open. I did not send a PDF proposal. I sent a single hard drive containing a simulation of their current bottleneck, resolved using Nexus Flow. 2 days later, I received a summons. I flew to their headquarters in Seattle. I did not fly coach this time. I walked into the boardroom of Omnimart wearing a tailored navy suit that cost more than my father's car. My hair was cut into a sharp, asymmetrical bob. I wore glasses I did not strictly need because they acted as a shield. The room was filled with men in gray suits, executives from the biggest consulting firms in the world. They had binders thick with charts and buzzwords. They looked at me, a 24-year-old woman walking in alone, and I saw the familiar flicker of dismissal in their eyes. They saw a girl. They did not see the shark. The CEO of Omnimart, a man named Sterling who looked like he had not slept in a week, waved his hand. "Make it quick. IBM just told me it will take 6 months to patch the port integration." "I do not have 6 months. I do not have 6 days. I can do it in 48 hours, I said. The room went silent. A vice president from a competing firm scoffed audibly. "That is impossible. The data migration alone would take weeks." I did not look at him. I looked directly at Sterling. I pulled out my laptop and connected it to the main screen. "You are thinking linearly," I said, my voice projecting with the cold authority of someone who knows they are the smartest person in the room. "You are trying to push the cargo through the bottleneck. That is why you are failing. Nexus Flow does not look at the bottleneck. It looks at the entire organism." I hit a key. The screen exploded into a visualization of the globe. Thousands of tiny lights represented their stranded containers. "My AI has already analyzed your manifest," I continued. "It has cross-referenced it with every available secondary port, rail line, and air freight capacity in North America. It has also factored in weather patterns for the next 10 days and the labor schedules of the Dock Workers Union." I pointed to a cluster of red dots off the coast of California. "These ships are stuck. You are paying demurrage fees on them every hour. But look here." I zoomed in on a small, underutilized port in Ensenada, Mexico, and another in British Columbia. Nexus Flow has identified capacity here. If you reroute 30% of the non-perishable goods to Ensenada and truck them north across the border using the secondary highway system, you bypass the Los Angeles gridlock entirely. For the high-value electronics, we switch to air freight out of secondary airfields in the Mojave Desert, where the tarmac fees are low. The simulation ran. The red dots began to move. The lines turned green. The backlog cleared in the simulation in real time. "This is not a theory," I said. "This is a live simulation using your actual data. The code is ready. I just need you to give me the keys to the ignition." Sterling stared at the screen. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the projector fan. "Who are you?" he asked. His voice hushed. "My name is A. Stone," I said. "And I am the CEO of Etherius Logic." "And the cost?" he asked. $5 million for the implementation," I said without blinking. "And a recurring licensing fee of $2 million a year." The consultant from the other firm slammed his hand on the table. "This is extortion. She is a kid. She is making this up." Sterling ignored him. He looked at the simulation. Then he looked at me. He saw the fire. He saw the certainty. "Do it," Sterling said. "Get the legal team in here. We sign today?" Walking out of that building was a sensation I could not fully describe. It was not just joy. It was vindication. It was the physical sensation of gravity shifting. I was no longer the object being crushed. I was the planet. The implementation worked. Within 48 hours, Omnimart's goods were moving. The stock price rebounded. The industry press went wild. Trying to find out who Etherius Logic was, they called us the ghost in the machine. The first payment hit my business account 3 days later. $5 million. I sat in my office at the warehouse. Staring at the screen, I refreshed the page. The numbers stayed there. 5, followed by 6 zeros. I thought about the $42. I thought about the roaches. I thought about the night my mother threw my suitcase into the snow. I did not go out and buy a Ferrari. That was what Preston would have done. I did not throw a party. That was what my parents would have done. Instead, I called a real estate agent who specialized in discreet, high-net-worth clients. "I want a place in the Spire," I told him. "Top floor, private elevator, and I want it under an LLC, no names." 2 weeks later, I moved into a condo that overlooked the entire city of Chicago. It had floor-to-ceiling windows that turned the skyline into my personal wallpaper. The floors were heated marble. The kitchen cost more than the house I grew up in. But I kept the warehouse. I kept the team. I kept the grind. I made a crucial decision then. As my profile rose in the business world, I became a phantom. I refused video interviews. I refused to have my photo on the company website, in all press releases and legal documents. I was listed simply as A.W. Stone to the world. A. Stone was a reclusive male genius, an eccentric coder who preferred the shadows. I let them believe it. It was safer. But the primary reason was not business strategy. It was personal security. I knew my family. I knew that if Linda or Howard or Preston saw the name Ariel Winslow linked to a multi-million-dollar company, they would descend like locusts. They would not care about the years of abuse. They would not care about the eviction. They would rewrite history. They would claim they had always supported me. They would sue for parental rights or guilt-trip me into funding Preston's next catastrophe. I became A.W. Stone to protect Ariel Winslow. I stood on my balcony that first night in the new apartment, the wind whipping at my hair, the same wind that had frozen me 5 years ago. But now, up here, it felt different. It felt like power. I looked down at the grid of the city, at the millions of lights, somewhere down there, in the suburbs. My parents were likely sitting in their decaying house, watching reruns, complaining about their bills, waiting for Preston to become the savior he would never be. They were still waiting for a miracle. I had built my own. I took a sip of sparkling water. I didn't drink alcohol. I needed my mind sharp, always sharp. The game was just beginning. I had the capital now. I had the weapon now. It was time to prepare for the war I knew was coming. Because you cannot outrun your past forever. Eventually, you have to turn around and buy it out. And I was ready to buy. Time is a cruel auditor. It keeps a ledger that cannot be cooked. And 9 years after I walked out into the snow, the balance sheets of my life and the lives of the Winslow family were telling two very different stories. While I was ascending, clawing my way up the glass walls of the global tech industry, my family was engaged in a slow, agonizing spiral toward the drain. I knew this not because I visited, and not because I called, but because information is a commodity, and I had the resources to buy it in bulk. At 28 years old, I sat in a conference room that felt more like a fortress than an office. The walls were soundproofed glass, offering a panoramic view of a city that looked like a circuit board from this height. Across from me sat a journalist from Forbes magazine. He was a nervous man, clicking his pen repeatedly, clearly unsettled by the conditions of our meeting. "So," he stammered, looking at his notes, "Aetheris Logic, you have just completed a Series C funding round that values the company at $3 billion. You are officially a unicorn 3 times over. And yet, Ms. Stone, or should I call you? Ms. Stone is fine." I cut him off. My voice was calm, modulated to a pitch that commanded attention without raising volume. "Right, Ms. Stone, the industry calls you the Phantom. You do not attend galas. You do not do TED Talks. You do not even have a LinkedIn photo. Our editor is insisting on a cover shot for this issue." I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair. "Tell your editor he can have a photo of my back, looking out this window, or he can have a photo of my silhouette against a projector screen. Those are the options. If he wants a face, he can interview the CEO of a company that is losing money. They love the publicity." The journalist sighed, defeated. "A silhouette it is. But tell me, why the secrecy? You are one of the wealthiest self-made women under 30 in America. Why hide focus?" I said. "It is not about hiding. It is about control. My face is not the product. The code is the product." He scribbled that down. thinking it was a profound philosophical stance. He did not know that the real reason I remained a ghost was sitting in a dilapidated living room 30 miles away, watching daytime television and waiting for a handout. If the journalist had pointed his camera lens at the Winslow household that afternoon, he would have captured a tragicomedy of errors. Preston was now 30 years old. Physically, he had begun to soften around the edges, the college athlete physique giving way to the doughy complexion of a man whose primary exercise was dodging responsibility. He was currently living in his old bedroom, the same room where he had once mocked me for fixing computers. His resume was a graveyard of bad ideas. Over the last 4 years, Preston had launched and crashed 4 separate revolutionary startups. First, there was the craft beer delivery service that failed because he drank the inventory and forgot to get a liquor license. Then came the cryptocurrency venture, Winslow Coin, which turned out to be a classic rug pull where he was the one who got rug pulled by his own partners. Next was the virtual real estate firm selling plots of land in a metaverse that no one visited. And finally, a drop-shipping business selling cheap plastic gadgets that broke before they even reached the customer. Each failure followed the same pattern. Preston would announce he was a genius. He would burn through capital, he would crash, and then he would blame the market, the government, or his horoscope. But the capital he burned was not his. My parents, Howard and Linda, were the fuel for his dumpster fire. They had sold the 2 rental properties they had inherited from my grandmother. They had liquidated their IRAs, paying massive tax penalties to withdraw the cash early. They had decimated their savings. They did this because they were addicts. They were addicted to the delusion that Preston was special. They had bet everything on the wrong horse, and instead of cutting their losses, they kept doubling down, convinced that the next race would be the one where he finally justified their favoritism. My mother managed the cognitive dissonance by rewriting reality. I had a report on my desk from a private investigator detailing a conversation Linda had with a neighbor at the local grocery store just last week. "Oh, poor Ariel," Linda had said, clutching a carton of discount eggs. "We have not heard from her in years. It breaks a mother's heart. You know, we tried everything. Rehab, therapy, money, but she just had demons. We think she is living on the streets in California somewhere. Maybe on drugs. We pray for her. But what can you do when a child rejects God's love?" Reading that report, I didn't feel anger. I felt a cold, clinical satisfaction. It confirmed everything. She had to invent a story where I was the failure to protect her fragile ego from the truth that she had thrown out the only child who could have saved them, while Linda was painting me as a junkie to the neighborhood watch. I was executing a financial maneuver that would have made a shark blush. I had initiated Project Nemesis 6 months prior. It was not an official company project. It was a personal acquisition strategy run through a shell company I had incorporated in Delaware called Nemesis Holdings. The target was not a competitor. It was the First National Bank of the suburbs, a small regional bank that held the mortgage on my parents' house. The bank was struggling. They had too many toxic assets and were looking to offload bad debt to shore up their liquidity. I approached them through my lawyers, offering to buy a bundle of high-risk mortgages at 90 cents on the dollar. Buried deep in that bundle, like a needle in a haystack, was the file for 42 Oak Creek Drive. The Winslow residents. I wasn't just buying their debt, I was buying the leash around their necks. The dossier from my investigator, a man named Vance who specialized in forensic accounting, was thorough. I opened the leather-bound folder and ran my finger down the numbers. It was an autopsy of a financial suicide. Subject Howard and Linda Winslow. Primary residence estimated value, $450,000. Outstanding mortgage, $380,000. They had refinanced 3 times. Credit card debt, $62,000. Across 8 cards, auto loans, 2 luxury leases, both 2 months behind on payments, liquidity. Less than $4,000 in checking. They were drowning. They were 1 missed paycheck, 1 medical emergency, 1 stiff breeze away from total collapse, and yet they still drove a Lexus. They still went to the country club for dinner, putting the bill on a credit card that was already maxed out, hoping the waiter wouldn't notice if it was declined. But the final nail in the coffin was being hammered in by Preston right at that moment. Vance had included a transcript of a conversation recorded in the Winslow living room 2 days ago. I didn't ask how he got it. Vance was expensive for a reason. I put on my noise-canceling headphones and pressed play. The audio was crisp. "Mom, Dad, listen to me." Preston's voice was frantic, manic. "This is it. This is the one. Forget the crypto. That was ahead of its time. This is real. It is called Apex Heritage. It is a direct sales marketing system for high-end nutritional supplements. I do not know. Son." My father's voice sounded tired, old. "We do not have any more cash. The retirement accounts are empty." "That is the beauty of it," Preston shouted. "You do not need cash. You just need equity. Look, the house is sitting here. It is dead money. If we take out a home equity line of credit, a HELOC, we can pull out $50,000. That buys me the diamond tier distribution rights. I get the inventory. I recruit 3 guys underneath me, and boom, passive income. We are talking $10,000 a month. Conservative estimate." 10,000? My mother's voice perked up. Greed was the only thing that could override her anxiety. "Easy," Preston lied. "And in 6 months, I pay off the loan. I buy you a new car, and we are set. But I need to move now. The enrollment window closes on Friday. If I miss this, I miss the ground floor. Do you want me to miss the ground floor again?" There was a silence, a long, heavy silence, where 2 parents should have told their 30-year-old son to get a job at a gas station. "He sounds so sure." "Howard," Linda whispered. "And the brochure looks very professional." "It is our last shot, Dad," Preston pleaded. "I promise. I swear on my life. I will make you proud." "Okay," Howard said softly. "Okay, we will go to the bank on Thursday." I stopped the recording. I took off the headphones and looked out the window. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the city. They were going to take out a second mortgage on a house they barely owned to fund a pyramid scheme. It was almost poetic in its stupidity. But there was a catch, because I had just bought the primary mortgage note through Nemesis Holdings. Any new lien or line of credit on the property required the approval of the primary lien holder, me. My intercom buzzed. It was my assistant, Ms. Stone. "The legal team from Nemesis Holdings sent over the documents you requested, the default swap and acquisition papers. Bring them in," I said. And then, when the first payment was due, when the pyramid scheme inevitably collapsed and the money was gone, I would pull the trigger on the foreclosure clause. I looked at the signature line, A. Stone. I signed it with a flourish. "Send this to the bank," I told my assistant, "and tell Vance to keep watching. I want to know the exact moment Preston spends the first dollar of that loan." "Yes, ma'am. Is there anything else?" "Yes," I said, standing up and smoothing out my skirt. "Order me dinner, something expensive. I feel like celebrating." "What are we celebrating?" she asked. "An acquisition," I said, a small, cold smile playing on my lips. "We just bought a very distressed asset with high sentimental value." I walked to the window again. I could almost feel the vibration of the chaos I was about to unleash. My mother had once told me to pay my own bills. I had done that. Now, I was going to make sure she paid hers, every single cent. The contrast between us was complete. They were living in a house of cards built on lies and debt. I was living in a fortress of steel built on truth and revenue. And the wind was picking up. Disaster did not knock on the door of the Winslow household. It kicked the door down with a steel-toed boot. I watched the collapse of Preston's Apex Heritage scheme from the comfort of my office, tracking the inevitable implosion through the forensic updates provided by my private investigator. Vance. It was a textbook Ponzi scheme crash. The website for the nutritional supplement company went dark on a Tuesday morning, by noon. The customer service lines were disconnected. By 2 in the afternoon, The message boards were flooding with panic from distributors who had realized their inventory was never coming. Preston had wired $50,000 money secured against the very walls that sheltered my aging parents to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. He had done it with the confident swagger of a man who believed he was smarter than the system. When the server error message flashed on his laptop screen, sitting on the messy desk in his childhood bedroom, the reality of his stupidity finally made contact with his ego. According to Vance's report, the screaming started around 3 o'clock. "It is a glitch," Preston had yelled, his voice cracking with hysteria as he paced the living room. "It is just a server maintenance thing." "Dad?" "The CEO sent an email last week. They are upgrading the system because of the massive volume. You said the inventory would be here yesterday." My father, Howard, said. His voice was trembling. He was sitting in his recliner, clutching a past due notice from the water company. "Preston, that $50,000, the first payment on the home equity line, is due on the 1st. If we do not pay it, plus the interest." "I know. Stop nagging me," Preston shouted, throwing a decorative vase across the room. It shattered against the fireplace, a sound that mirrored the fracturing of their financial reality. "I need more time. I just need to call the upline leader." But the upline leader was gone. His number was disconnected. The Diamond Tier support email bounced back. The $50,000 had evaporated. It was not an investment. It was a donation to a con artist who was likely sipping a margarita on a beach while my family burned. Then came the wolves, because Preston had used his personal information and my parents' home address for the business registration to bypass some legal hurdles. The creditors were not just faceless banks. He had borrowed smaller amounts from loan sharks, predatory lenders who operated out of the back of payday loan shops, to cover the processing fees. They started calling the house phone every 10 minutes. They parked unmarked cars across the street. The stress was a physical weight, pressing down on a house that had no structural integrity left. 2 days after the website went down, my father collapsed in the kitchen. He had been opening a letter from the bank, a notification that their account was overdrawn by $400. He gasped, clutching his left arm, his face turning a terrifying shade of gray. He crumpled to the linoleum floor, knocking over a chair. "Howard!" my mother screamed. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and panic. At the hospital, the tragedy deepened into farce. While my father was being stabilized in the emergency room, it was a transient ischemic attack, a mini-stroke brought on by extreme hypertension. My mother was at the intake desk, arguing with the billing coordinator. "What do you mean, we are not covered for the MRI?" Linda shrieked, her hands shaking as she held her purse. "We have the gold plan. We have had it for 20 years. The woman behind the glass looked sympathetic but firm. "I am sorry. Mrs. Winslow, our records show that you downgraded your policy to the Bronze Saver plan 3 months ago. The deductible was raised to $10,000 to lower your monthly premium. You signed the paperwork yourself." Linda froze. She remembered. She had cut the insurance premium to save $300 a month. $300 that she had handed directly to Preston so he could buy a power suit for his new business venture. They had literally sold their health to fund his vanity. "We cannot pay $10,000, Linda whispered, her face pale. "We can set up a payment plan," the woman said, "but we will need a credit card on file for the initial deposit of $500. Linda didn't have $500. Her credit cards were maxed out. She had to call Preston, who was sitting in the waiting room, scrolling through his phone, looking for a way to blame someone else. He had to use a credit card he had opened in a fake name to pay the deposit. They took Howard home 2 days later. He was alive, but he was a broken man. The right side of his face drooped slightly, and his speech was slurred. He sat in his chair, staring at the blank television, tears occasionally leaking from his eyes. He knew. He finally knew that his son had ruined him. But denial is a powerful drug, and my mother was an addict. Instead of kicking Preston out, she turned her desperation outward. She sat at the kitchen table with her address book. a relic from the 1990s, and began dialing every relative she could find. "Hello, Margaret. It is Linda. Yes, it has been a long time. Listen, honey, we are in a bit of a bind. Howard is sick, yes. A stroke. It is terrible. We just need a bridge loan. Just $5,000. Preston is on the verge of a huge deal. Huge. But we need cash flow." Click. "Hello? Uncle Bob? It is your favorite niece. How are you? Listen." Click, one by one. The bridges burned. The extended family knew. They knew Preston was a leech. They knew Linda was an enabler. They had watched from a distance as the Winslows descended into arrogance and debt, and now nobody was willing to catch a falling knife. "They are all jealous," Linda spat, slamming the phone down after the 10th rejection. "Selfish, ungrateful people, after all we did for them." She had done nothing for them. But in her mind, she was a martyr. It was in this atmosphere of suffocating doom that Preston, desperate to find a lifeline that didn't involve him actually working, remembered me. He was rummaging through the attic, looking for anything he could sell at a pawn shop: old jewelry, silverware, vintage records. He knocked over a box of my old things that my mother had never bothered to throw away, mostly because she was a hoarder of junk. A file spilled out. It was a manila folder from my high school days, containing my old report cards and a few printed emails from when I had first started applying for internships before I left. But mixed in with the papers was a more recent document, a printout he must have made years ago and forgotten. It was a page from a tech conference brochure from 4 years ago. It listed Ethirus Logic as a participating company. Preston squinted at the paper. He saw the name A.W. Stone, CEO. And then, in the fine print of the attendee list, he saw my name, Ariel Winslow, but he misread the context. The list was alphabetical by attendee, not by rank. Next to my name, it listed my affiliation, Ethirus Logic, Delegate. Preston's brain, warped by his own mediocrity, connected the dots in the only way he could understand. "Mom!" he shouted, running down the stairs, waving the paper. "Mom, look at this." Linda looked up from her misery. "What is it? Did you find the silver tea set?" "No. Better. I found Ariel." "Do not say her name," Linda hissed. "That ungrateful, wretched girl." "No, listen," Preston said, his eyes gleaming with a predatory light. "Look at this. She was at this tech conference in San Francisco. She is working for a company called Ethirus Logic. So, I looked them up just now on my phone. Mom, this company is huge. They are worth billions. They handle logistics for Omnimart." "You think she owns it?" Linda asked, her breath catching. Preston laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Her own $1 billion company. Don't be stupid. Mom, she didn't even finish community college. She is a dropout. But look." He pointed to the paper. "She is a delegate. That means she is staff. She is probably a secretary or an executive assistant to the CEO. This A.W. Stone guy. A secretary?" Linda frowned. "Think about it," Preston said, pacing rapidly. "Executive assistants to billionaires make 6 figures. They have corporate credit cards. They have access to the boss's ear. She is probably sleeping with him. Knowing her, that is how she survives." "She has money," Linda whispered. The realization dawned on her like a sunrise over a landfill. "She has access to money," Preston corrected. "And she owes us. We raised her. We fed her. If she is making big city money working for some tech mogul, she can afford to bail us out. $50,000 is probably what her boss spends on lunch." "She won't give it to us," Linda said bitterly. "She walked out. She hates us." "She doesn't hate Dad," Preston said, playing his ace card. "She was always Daddy's little girl, wasn't she? Trying to show him her homework, trying to get his attention." He looked at his father, who was slumped in the chair, drooling slightly. "We use Dad," Preston said. "We tell her he is dying. We tell her he is asking for her on his deathbed. She will come. She has to come. Guilt is the only leverage we have. And when will she get here? Linda asked. We guilt trip her into signing a check, Preston said. Or we get her to put the house debt on her corporate card. We tell her it is a loan. Once we have the money, who cares? It was a plan born of malice and desperation, the kind of scheme only a sociopath could conceive and a narcissist could execute. They needed to find me. The email address on the old printout was dead, but Preston was motivated. He paid a skip tracer online $50 charged to a stolen credit card number he bought on the dark web to find my current contact info. Because I was careful. My personal email was locked down, but my old public-facing email from the early days of Etherius, the one I used for general inquiries before I became the Phantom, was still active. Forwarded to a junk folder I rarely checked. They found it. Ariel, weather is logic, calm. Linda sat down at the computer. She spent an hour crafting the email. She used every weapon in her arsenal: pity, shame, religious guilt, and lies. Subject: please come home. Dad is fading. Dearest Ariel, I know we have had our differences. I know you think we were hard on you, but God knows we only wanted you to be strong. But none of that matters now. Your father had a massive stroke. The doctors say it is bad. He is in the hospice care at home now. He can barely speak, but yesterday, he whispered your name. He wants to see you. He wants to make peace before the Lord takes him. We are struggling. Ariel, the medical bills are drowning us. I don't know how we will pay for the funeral, but I don't care about money. I just want our family to be whole one last time. Please, don't let your father die without seeing his daughter. Preston is being so strong, taking care of everything, but he needs his sister. Please come home, for Christmas. It might be his last. Love, Mom. I read the email on a 27-inch monitor in my office on the 42nd floor. The city of Chicago lay spread out beneath me. A glittering grid of ambition and cold concrete. The email had arrived 3 hours ago. I had read it 4 times. I picked up the phone and dialed Vance. Vance, status report on Howard Winslow. One moment. Ms. Stone, Vance's gravelly voice came through the speaker. I heard the clicking of keys. Subject was discharged from St. Jude's Hospital 2 days ago. Diagnosis: transient ischemic attack. Minor motor impairment on the right side. Speech is slurred but functional. Life expectancy is normal, provided he takes his blood pressure medication. He is currently sitting in the living room watching a game show. He is not, I repeat, not dying. Thank you, Vance. And the financial status. Critical. The loan sharks are circling. The bank has sent the pre-foreclosure notice on the secondary lien. They are desperate. They are looking for a bailout. Understood. I hung up the phone. I looked at the email again. He whispered your name. He hadn't whispered my name in 20 years. Unless it was to ask me to move out of the way of the television. They were lying about his death to extort money from me. They thought I was a secretary. They thought I was weak. They thought that 10 years of silence meant I was still the scared little girl who dragged a trash bag through the snow. They had no idea that I was the one holding the mortgage. They had no idea that the A.W. Stone they likely cursed for being a rich tech overlord was the daughter they had discarded. I stood up and walked to the window. My reflection ghosted against the glass-sharp suit, cold eyes, a posture of absolute control. It was time. I had bought the debt. I had bought the bank. Now, I needed to deliver the eviction notice in person. I sat back down at my keyboard. I didn't use a formal signature. I didn't use a title. I typed a single line. I will be there. Christmas Eve. I hit send. Let them think they had hooked a fish. They didn't know they had just reeled in a leviathan. The game was over. It was time for the final score. The closet in my downtown penthouse was larger than the bedroom I had grown up in. It was filled with Italian wool, French silk, and shoes that cost more than a mid-size sedan. But for this trip, I pushed aside the armor of the CEO and reached for the camouflage of the secretary. I selected a pair of gray slacks from a department store brand, a simple white blouse, and a cardigan that had seen better days. I removed my watch, a Patek Philippe that whispered wealth only to those who knew how to listen, and replaced it with a generic quartz timepiece with a leather strap that was slightly peeling at the edges. I took off my diamond studs. I scrubbed the expensive serum from my face and applied a drugstore foundation that was a shade too pale. I was not dressing to deceive them. I was dressing to reveal them. If I rolled up to 42 Oak Creek Drive in my armored black SUV with a driver and a security detail, wearing a $10,000 suit, I knew exactly what would happen. The greed would be instantaneous. The fawning would be immediate. They would love me, or at least the reflection of themselves in my money, but I wanted to know if they could love me, or, if not love, if they could at least show a shred of human decency to a daughter who, as far as they knew, was just scraping by, just like them. I took the elevator down to the garage, but I walked past my own cars. I had sent my assistant to a rental agency near the airport to pick up a vehicle. It was waiting for me in Bay 4, a beige sedan. 5 years old, with a dent in the rear bumper and an interior that smelled faintly of vanilla air freshener and someone else's cigarettes. I tossed my overnight bag into the passenger seat. It contained nothing of value. Just clothes, a toothbrush, and the file that would end everything. I drove out of the city, merging onto the interstate. The skyline of Chicago, my kingdom, receded in the rearview mirror. Ahead lay the suburbs, the sprawling, suffocating grid of mediocrity where dreams went to die on a 30-year fixed mortgage. I knew exactly what was happening inside the house I was driving toward. My surveillance on the Winslow family was total. I knew that 3 days ago. A courier from Nemesis Holdings, my holding company, had taped a notice to their front door. It was a notice of intent to foreclose. It stated, in cold legal font, that they had 30 days to cure the default on the primary mortgage or the property would be auctioned. They did not have the money. They did not have the credit. They were trapped in a box, and the walls were closing in. I also knew their plan for me. Vance had sent me an audio clip from the living room bug just that morning. "She has to have something," Preston had said, his voice rising in that whiny pitch that always preceded a tantrum. "Even if she is just a secretary, she has been working for 10 years. She must have a 401k or savings, or maybe she is banging some middle management guy who can co-sign a loan. We just need a signature," my mother had replied. "We just need her to guarantee the refinancing. Once we get the cash, we can pay off the Nemesis people and get Preston's business back on track." "Exactly," Preston had said. "We just have to play nice. Don't mention the fight. Don't mention the money right away. Wait until after dinner. Get her soft. Get her crying about Dad." "I will make a pot roast," Linda had said. She used to like pot roast. I gripped the steering wheel of the rental car until my knuckles turned white. They were not planning a reunion. They were planning a harvest. I was the crop. I turned off the highway and navigated the familiar, winding streets of the subdivision. It looked smaller than I remembered. The trees were bare, skeletal fingers scratching at the gray sky. The snow was piled high on the curbs, dirty and gray with exhaust soot. The neighborhood had declined. There were "for sale" signs on every third lawn. The roofs were patchy. It was a place where people were holding on by their fingernails. I pulled into the driveway of number 42. The house looked tired. The shutters were peeling. The gutter on the left side was hanging loose, swaying slightly in the wind. But the walkway had been shoveled, and there was a wreath on the door, a desperate attempt to project normalcy. I killed the engine. I sat there for a moment, listening to the ticking of the cooling metal. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the cheap vanilla air freshener. Showtime. I stepped out of the car. The cold air hit me, identical to the cold that had welcomed me the night I left. But I didn't shiver this time. The front door opened before I even reached the steps. My mother stepped out. She had aged. That was my first thought. Her hair was dyed a brittle, aggressive blonde to hide the gray, and her face was heavy with the sag of constant worry and cheap wine. She was wearing an apron over a dress I recognized from a Christmas party 15 years ago. She threw her arms open. "Ariel, my baby. You came." She rushed down the steps and enveloped me in a hug. It smelled of pot roast and desperation. Her arms were tight, too tight, like a trap snapping shut. "Hi, Mom," I said, my voice neutral. I didn't hug her back. I let my arms hang by my sides. She pulled back, holding me by the shoulders, and her eyes immediately did the scan. It was a reflex for her. She looked at my face, then down to my clothes, then to my shoes, and finally, over my shoulder at the car. I saw the micro-expression perfectly. Her eyes landed on the dented bumper of the beige sedan. Her pupils contracted. The corners of her mouth twitched downward for a fraction of a second. Disappointment. She had been hoping for a Mercedes. She had been hoping for a sign that the Bank of Ariel was open for business. The beige sedan told her a different story, that I was just another struggling worker bee. But she recovered quickly. The mask slammed back into place. "Oh, look at you," she said, her voice straining for warmth. "You look healthy. Come inside. It is freezing. Preston Howard. She is here." I followed her into the house. The heat was cranked up too high, a stifling 80 degrees, likely to compensate for the drafts they couldn't afford to fix. The smell of the roast was overwhelming, masking the underlying scent of dust and old carpet. The living room had been staged. The clutter was gone. There were family photos arranged on the mantelpiece. Preston at graduation, Preston at a baseball game, Preston on vacation. There were no photos of me. Preston was standing by the fireplace, posing as if he were waiting for a photographer from Better Homes and Gardens. He wore a sweater that was meant to look collegiate, but just looked lumpy. He held a glass of dark liquid, likely whiskey and Coke. He walked over to me, his gait loose and arrogant. He looked me up and down, not with the calculating greed of my mother, but with the sneering superiority of a brother who needed to believe he was still the alpha. "Well, well," he said, smirking. "The prodigal sister returns." He didn't hug me. He extended a hand, then pulled it back and patted me on the shoulder. A condescending gesture. "Hey, Preston," I said. "You look okay," he said, tilting his head. "A little tired around the eyes, maybe. Corporate life grinding you down. I heard you are an assistant or something now." He was fishing. He wanted me to confirm my low status so he could feel better about his own failures. "I work in operations," I said vaguely. "It pays the bills." "Operations," he scoffed lightly. "Paper pushing. Nice. Safe. Well, someone has to do the grunt work while the visionaries lead. Right?" "Right," I said. Then I looked at the armchair in the corner. My father was sitting there. He looked smaller than I remembered, deflated, like a balloon that had been slowly leaking air for a decade. The right side of his face drooped slightly, the legacy of the stroke they had used as bait, but he was sitting up. He was watching the football game on the TV, with the volume muted. He wasn't dying. He wasn't whispering my name on his deathbed. He was just an old man who had made bad choices. "Dad," I said. He looked up. His eyes were watery and confused for a moment. Then recognition flickered. "Ariel," he rasped. "Is that you?" "It is me," I said. "You cut your hair," he said. 10 years ago. Dad." Right. He looked away, back to the TV. "Did you see the Bears game? They are terrible this year." That was it. That was the reunion. No tears, no apologies. Just a comment on his hair and the Chicago Bears. "Dinner is ready," Linda announced, her voice too loud, too cheerful. "Let's eat in the dining room, like a real family." We moved to the dining table. It was set with the good china. The plates chipped at the edges. The pot roast sat in the center, gray and overcooked. I sat in my old spot, the chair wobbly. Preston sat at the head of the table, usurping my father's place without anyone questioning it. Linda bustled around, pouring cheap wine into crystal glasses. "So," Linda said, sitting down and clasping her hands. "Here we are, together again, just like I prayed for." She looked at me, her eyes glistening with manufactured emotion. "We have missed you so much," Ariel, we talk about you all the time. Really? I asked, unfolding my napkin. What do you say? Oh, just how proud we are, she lied smoothly. That you went out there and made a life. Independent, just like we taught you. You taught me, I asked, keeping my voice level. I seem to remember being told to get out. The air in the room froze for a second. Preston cleared his throat loudly. Water under the bridge. Ariel, he said dismissively. We were all emotional. Mom was just trying to motivate you. And look, it worked. You are employing yourself. You have a car. You are surviving. Surviving, I repeated. Exactly, Preston said, leaning forward. But family is about more than just surviving. It is about thriving together. It is about helping each other when the chips are down. Here it comes. They hadn't even finished the salad course yet. Speaking of chips, I said, deciding to test the waters. How is the business, Preston? I heard you were doing something with vitamins. Preston flinched. Linda quickly interjected. Oh, it is going wonderful, just wonderful. It is a temporary restructuring phase. The market is very volatile right now, but Preston has a plan, a big plan. I just need a little runway, Preston said, taking a large gulp of wine. Liquidity, you know how it is in business. Ariel, you have to spend money to make money. I am on the verge of acquiring a massive distribution network, but the banks are so short-sighted. They don't see the vision. That is unfortunate, I said, cutting a piece of dry meat. It is criminal, Linda said, her voice trembling with indignation. After everything we have done, everything we have paid. But you know, Ariel, that is why family is so important. When the world turns its back, family steps in. She looked at me, her eyes wide and pleading, but it wasn't love in her gaze, it was hunger. She was looking at me like a vampire looks at a vein. We are in a bit of a tight spot, honey, Linda continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. Just a temporary cash flow issue. Your father's medical bills were astronomical. We almost lost him. She reached out and touched my hand. Her skin was cold. We were thinking, she said, since you are single and working steady, maybe you could help us figure this out. Just look at the paperwork. Maybe sign a little something to help your brother get his bridge loan. It would mean saving the house. The house, I said, looking around the peeling wallpaper. You want me to save this house? It is your home too, Preston said, his voice hardening. Unless you have forgotten where you came from. I looked at them. Really looked at them. They didn't ask me if I was happy. They didn't ask if I had anyone in my life. They didn't ask what I did for a living. Really. They didn't care if I had spent the last 10 years in a coal mine or a palace. To them, I was just a signature. I was a resource to be strip-mined to feed the black hole of Preston's ego. There was no remorse, no reflection. They truly believed they were entitled to my help. They believed that because they had birthed me, they owned me. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't anger anymore. Anger is hot. It was cold. It was the absolute zero of emotional detachment. I put my fork down. I hadn't taken a bite. You are right, Mom, I said softly. Bills have to be paid. Debts have to be settled. Linda beamed, thinking she had won. Preston smirked, leaning back in his chair, victory already relaxing his shoulders. I knew you would understand, Linda said. You are a good girl, Ariel, deep down. I am, I said. I am very good at settling debts. I reached down to my bag on the floor. Actually, I said, I brought something for you, a Christmas present. You didn't have to, Preston said, feigning modesty, but his eyes darted to the bag, expecting cash or a checkbook. I pulled out the thick manila envelope. It wasn't wrapped. It was stamped with the logo of Nemesis Holdings in red ink. I placed it on the table, right next to the pot roast. Open it, I said. The air in the room shifted. The warm family facade flickered. The storm was about to break, and they didn't even have an umbrella. The envelope I had placed on the table sat between the salt shaker and the congealing gravy boat like a landmine disguised as stationery. The red logo of Nemesis Holdings was facing up, but in the dim, yellowed light of the dining room chandelier, neither my mother nor my brother seemed to recognize the branding. They were too focused on the smell of money they imagined was emanating from my person to worry about corporate trademarks. "We will open gifts later," Preston said, pushing the envelope aside with the back of his hand as if it were a coaster. He didn't even look at it. To him, a flat envelope meant a gift card, probably for $50 or $100. Pocket change. He was hunting bigger game tonight. "Let's eat. Mom made her famous roast." I looked at the meat on my plate. It was gray, fibrous, and drowned in a brown sauce that had clearly come from a packet. It was the same meal we had eaten every Sunday of my childhood. A culinary tradition of overcooking cheap cuts until they surrendered their structural integrity. "It looks delicious, Mom," I lied, picking up my fork. "Eat up," Linda said, her smile tight and predatory. "You look thin. Ariel, city living, nobody cooks anymore. It is all takeout and sushi, isn't it?" "Something like that," I murmured. I took a sip of the wine. It was a Merlot from a jug, acidic and sugary, leaving a coating on my tongue that tasted like vinegar and regret. I watched them over the rim of the glass. The dynamic had not shifted in a decade. Preston ate like a wolf, shoveling food into his mouth, talking with his mouth full, confident that the world wanted to hear whatever he had to say. My father, Howard, ate silently, his eyes fixed on the tablecloth. A man who had long ago abdicated his throne. And Linda watched Preston, her eyes shining with that terrifying, unconditional adoration that had ruined him. "So," Preston began, pointing his fork at me. "Operations, that is cool. But you know, the corporate rat race is a trap, trading time for money. I realized early on that I wasn't built for a 9-to-5. I have the entrepreneur gene, you know, like Elon, like Bezos." I almost choked on my wine. "Like Bezos," I repeated, keeping my face blank. "Exactly." Preston nodded, oblivious to the sarcasm. "It is about vision. People like you, no offense, you execute. People like me, we disrupt." "Disrupt," I said. "Is that what happened to the crypto venture, a disruption?" Preston's jaw tightened. He set his fork down with a clatter. The market crashed. Ariel. It was a global correction. Even the big guys took a hit. You cannot blame the visionary for the weather. "Of course," Linda chimed in, pouring more wine into Preston's glass, ignoring mine. "He was so close. Ariel, if he had just had a little more time. The timing was just unlucky. That is the story of this family. Bad luck." "But luck is turning," Preston said, his voice rising with the manic energy of a salesman who believes his own pitch. "This new project, it is foolproof. It is not just vitamins. Ariel, it is biohacking. We are using AI, artificial intelligence, to customize nutrient profiles for high-performance individuals." I raised an eyebrow. "You are using AI?" "Well, the company is," Preston corrected quickly. "I am coming in at the executive distributor level, regional director. I control the downstream flow. It is passive income. I do the legwork now, and in 6 months, I am sitting on a beach in Tulum while the checks roll in. Conservative estimate, $20,000 a month." $20,000, I said. "That is impressive. So why do you need a loan?" The table went quiet. The air grew heavy. I had skipped the foreplay and gone straight to the transaction. Preston wiped his mouth with a paper napkin. He exchanged a look with Linda. The signal was clear. "Reel her in." "It is not a loan." "Really," Preston said, leaning forward, putting on his best charming smile, the one that had probably worked on high school cheerleaders, but now looked greasy on a 30-year-old man with debt collectors parking on his lawn. "It is a bridge, a liquidity injection, to secure the regional director tier. There is a buy-in, inventory, licensing, territory rights. It is standard franchising stuff." How much? I asked. $50,000, Preston said. He said the number quickly, as if saying it fast made the amount smaller. 50,000, I repeated slowly. That is a lot of money. It is an investment, Linda interjected, her voice high and shrill. Ariel, think about the return. He will pay you back in what? Preston, 2 months. 2 months? Tops, Preston promised. I will even give you interest. 10%. That is better than the stock market. I will write you a check for $55,000 in 60 days. Guaranteed. I looked at him. I looked at the sweat beading on his upper lip. I looked at the fraying collar of his shirt. And if you don't sell the vitamins, I asked, if the biohacking market isn't as robust as you think, what is the collateral? Collateral. Preston scoffed. We are family, Ariel. Why are you talking like a banker? Because you are asking for money like a borrower, I said. $50,000 is 2 years of rent for most people. If I lend you this money, and you lose it like you lost the crypto money, and the virtual real estate money, how do you pay me back? Do you have assets? Stocks? A car title? Preston's face flushed a blotchy red. I am not going to lose it. Why are you so negative? You have always been like this, always dragging me down, always jealous because I have big ideas, and you are just safe. I am not jealous. Preston, I said, swirling the wine in my glass. I am solvent. There is a difference. Oh, listen to her. Preston turned to Linda, gesturing wildly. I am solvent. Miss High and Mighty, you think because you push papers for some rich guy in the city you are better than us? I didn't say that, I said. I just asked a simple financial question. What is the repayment plan? The plan is, I make the money and I pay you, Preston shouted. God, you are difficult. Look, we know you have it. Mom said you are an executive assistant. We looked it up. People in your position have savings. You have a 401k. You can take a loan against it, or put it on a credit card. You have good credit, right? My credit is excellent, I said. 820. There you go. Preston slammed his hand on the table. You can get a signature loan in 24 hours. Just sign the paper, transfer the cash to my LLC, and we are done. I save the house. I launch the business. Everybody wins. Save the house? I asked. I thought this was for the business. Preston froze. He had slipped. Linda jumped in, her voice trembling. It is all connected. Honey, the business is all one pot. Your father's medical bills set us back. If Preston gets this business going, he can pay off the medical bills, and we can catch up on the mortgage. It is a domino effect. If you help him, you save us all. She reached across the table, her hand hovering near mine, shaking slightly. Ariel, she pleaded, please, look at your father. I looked at Howard. He was pushing a piece of carrot around his plate, refusing to make eye contact. Dad, I said, do you think this is a good idea betting the house on vitamins? He looked up. His eyes filled with a profound, exhausted shame. He opened his mouth to speak, but Linda cut him off. Don't bother him, she snapped. He is sick. He trusts Preston. He believes in his son. Why cannot you? Because I know him, I said quietly. You don't know me, Preston spat. You haven't been here in 10 years. You ran away. You abandoned us. I was kicked out, I corrected him. My voice was no longer soft. It was steel. Or have you forgotten it was snowing? I was 19. Mom threw my suitcase at my head. Oh, stop it. Linda waved her hand dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. You always had such a dramatic memory. We didn't kick you out. We gave you a push. You were stagnating. Ariel, you were wasting your life on that computer. We did it for your own good. I stared at her. The audacity was breathtaking. It was a masterpiece of gaslighting. For my own good, I repeated. Leaving me with $42 and no coat in a blizzard was for my own good. And look at you now, Linda said triumphantly, gesturing to my clean clothes. my calm demeanor. It worked. You are independent. You are strong. If we had coddled you, you would still be living in the basement playing video games. You should be thanking us. We made you who you are. You made me, I said, a dry laugh escaping my lips. That is one way to put it. So show some gratitude, Preston yelled. We made you tough. Now use that money to help the family that built you. Don't be a selfish little brat. You were selfish then. Hiding your money. Stealing my cash. I never stole your cash. Preston, I interrupted. You spent it on weed and lied about it. Liar. Preston stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. You are a liar and a thief. And now you come back here, acting superior, judging us. Who do you think you are? Sit down, Preston, I said. I didn't raise my voice, but the command whipped across the table like a lash. Don't tell me what to do, he screamed, his face purple. This is my house. I am the man of this house. You are just a guest who owes us rent for 18 years of free loading. Preston, calm down, Linda said, sensing that he was pushing too hard, but she turned her eyes to me, cold and hard. But he is right. Ariel, you have a duty. Family is the most important thing in the world. You cannot turn your back on your brother, not when you have so much and he has had such bad luck. It is not fair. Fair, I said. Let's talk about fair. I picked up my knife and fork. I deliberately, slowly, placed them down on the edge of my plate. Clink, clink. The sound was small, but in the sudden silence of the room, it sounded like the cocking of a gun. You want to talk about fairness, I said, looking from Linda to Preston. You want to talk about who paid for what. You want to talk about debts. Yes, Preston shouted. Pay your share. I agree, I said. I think it is time everyone paid their share. I reached out and picked up the manila envelope. I weighed it in my hand. It felt heavy. It felt like justice. You asked if I had money, I said, my eyes locking onto Preston's. You asked if I could get a loan. You asked if I was solvent. Stop playing games, Preston growled. Is there a check in there or not? Not exactly, I said. Then what is it? Linda asked, her eyes narrowing. It is a receipt, I said. I opened the clasp. The sound of the paper tearing was sharp. I pulled out the stack of documents. They were legal size, thick, bound with a blue staple. The header was clear, bold, and undeniable. Notice of assignment of debt, deed of trust. I tossed the papers onto the center of the table. They landed on top of the pot roast, staining the bottom page with brown gravy. What is this? Preston asked, looking at the papers with confusion. He picked up the top sheet. He read the words, but his brain refused to process them. That, I said, leaning back in my chair and crossing my arms, is the mortgage on this house and the promissory note for the $380,000 you owe to First National Bank. I don't understand, Linda said, her hands fluttering to her throat. Why do you have our mortgage papers? Because First National Bank doesn't hold the note anymore, I said, my voice dropping to a conversational, almost bored tone. They sold a portfolio of distressed assets last week, non-performing loans, toxic debt. I bought it. You bought it? Preston stammered. You mean your boss bought it? I laughed. It was a genuine laugh this time, dark and amused. Preston, I said, there is no boss. There is no middle management boyfriend. There is no 401k loan. I stood up. I didn't look like a secretary anymore. I stood with the posture of a woman who commanded fleets of ships and armies of coders. I am the boss, I said. I am A. Stone. I own Atheros Logic. I own Nemesis Holdings. And as of last Tuesday, I own you. The silence that followed was not merely the absence of sound. It was the vacuum of a universe collapsing. Preston dropped the papers. They fluttered to the floor, landing in the space between us, the chasm that had always been there, now filled with the wreckage of their assumptions. You're lying, Linda whispered. "You're lying. You're just a girl. You fix computers. Read the signature line." "Mother," I said, pointing to the document on the floor. "Look at the bottom of page 4. Preston scrambled down to pick it up. His hands were shaking so badly the paper rattled. He turned the pages. He found the signature. A. Stone. He looked up at me, his eyes wide, his mouth hanging open in a rictus of shock. "It is you," he breathed. "A Ariel Winslow Stone." "Bingo," I said. "And now," I continued, smoothing my cardigan, "we need to talk about my terms, because unlike the bank, I don't offer grace periods." I looked at the pot roast. "And this meat," I added, "is really dry." The silence in the dining room was heavy, a physical weight that pressed against the eardrums. It was the sound of a paradigm shifting, of the tectonic plates of our family dynamic grinding against each other before the inevitable earthquake. Preston was staring at the signature on the document, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from the water, gasping for air that was no longer available to him. Linda was gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles white, her eyes darting between me and the paper, trying to calculate a new reality where her daughter was not a failure, but a threat. I stood up slowly. The chair scraped against the hardwood floor, a harsh, deliberate sound. I smoothed the front of my cardigan, the cheap fabric feeling rough against my fingertips, a stark contrast to the power I was currently wielding. "Do you remember?" I asked. My voice was low, devoid of the anger they expected. It was calm. It was the voice of a judge delivering a verdict. "Remember what?" Linda whispered, her voice trembling. "The night you threw my suitcase into the snow," I said. "I was 19. It was 10 degrees below zero. You stood in the doorway, warm and angry, and you screamed something at me. Do you remember the words? 'Mother, because I do.' I have carried them with me every single day for 10 years. They were my fuel. They were my gospel." Linda shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes, but they were tears of fear, not remorse. "I was upset I didn't mean. You said," I interrupted her, my voice cutting through her excuses like a scalpel, "if you are so smart, then pay your own bills." I let the quote hang in the air. "That was the lesson, wasn't it?" I continued, walking slowly around the table toward them. "Self-reliance, the sanctity of the ledger. You taught me that the world does not owe me anything. You taught me that if I cannot pay, I do not belong. Well, Mother, I listened, I learned, I went out into that cold, and I paid my bills. I paid for my food, I paid for my shelter, I paid for my education, I paid every single invoice that life sent my way, and I never once asked for a discount." I stopped behind Preston's chair. He flinched, as if he expected me to strike him. "But then," I said, reaching into my large tote bag again, "I found a bill that hadn't been paid." I pulled out a second file. This one was thicker than the mortgage assignment. It was bound in heavy legal cardstock. I held it up for a moment, letting the light catch the glossy cover, and then I threw it onto the table. It landed with a heavy, dull thud. Sliding across the surface and knocking over the salt shaker, it was a deliberate echo of the way she had tossed my clothes into the snow, careless, final, and violent in its dismissal. "What is this?" Preston asked, his voice cracking. He reached for it, his hands shaking so badly he could barely lift the cover. "Read it," I commanded. Preston opened the file. He scanned the first page. His face, already pale, turned the color of ash. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a terror that I had never seen in him before. "This says $1,200,000, he stammered. "That is correct," I said. $1,200,000, Linda repeated, the number rolling off her tongue like a foreign curse. "What is that?" "We don't owe that much. The mortgage is only $380,000. "The mortgage is $380,000, I corrected. "The penalties for non-payment are another $20,000. The 4 business loans Preston took out using this house as cross-collateral without your full understanding. I assume total another $300,000. The credit card debt you have defaulted on, which has been sold and resold to collection agencies, is another $80,000, and the rest, that is the accumulated interest, legal fees, and the distressed asset premium. I leaned forward, placing my hands flat on the table. Last week, I was reviewing the books of the First National Bank of the suburbs. I noticed they were carrying a significant amount of bad debt, a specific portfolio of toxic assets that was dragging down their liquidity rating. $1,200,000 of liability tied to the name Winslow. Linda looked at me, hope suddenly flaring in her eyes, a desperate, delusional hope. She clasped her hands together. "You paid it," she gasped. "Oh, Ariel, you paid it for us. You cleared the debt. Is that what this is? A gift?" She started to stand up, ready to embrace the savior she thought she had just discovered. I laughed. It was a sharp, barking sound that stopped her in her tracks. "Paid it for you?" I asked, looking at her with genuine incredulity. "Why would I do that? That would be enabling. That would be making you weak. No, Mother, I didn't pay your debt." I pointed a finger at the document in Preston's hands. "I bought the debt." "I don't understand," Linda whispered, sinking back into her chair. "I bought the bank," I stated. Or, to be precise, Nemesis Holdings acquired a controlling interest in the First National Bank of the suburbs 3 days ago. We acquired their entire loan book, which means I am not your savior. I am your creditor. I own every single cent of debt you have accumulated in your lifetime. Preston dropped the file. He looked at me, and for the first time, he didn't see his little sister. He saw a predator. "You cannot do that," he sputtered, trying to find some ground to stand on. "That is conflict of interest. That is illegal." "It is capitalism," I said. "And it is entirely legal. You owe the bank, I own the bank, therefore, you owe me. $1,200,000, payable immediately." "We don't have it," Howard spoke up from the end of the table. His voice was stronger than it had been all night. He was looking at me with a strange expression, not fear, but a dawning realization of the monster they had created. "We don't have that kind of money. Ariel, you know that." "I know," I said. "Which brings me to the second part of my announcement." I walked over to the window and looked out at the street. I could see the reflection of the room in the glass, the shabby furniture, the desperate people, the gray pot roast. "You asked me earlier what I do," I said, turning back to face them. "You thought I was a secretary. You thought I was an assistant. You were wrong." I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. "I am the founder and CEO of Aetherus Logic. Last week, on Tuesday morning, I signed a deal with a consortium of global logistics firms. I sold my company." "Sold it?" Preston whispered. "For $400 million, I said. "Cash?" The sound of glass shattering punctuated the sentence. Preston had dropped his wineglass. It hit the edge of the table and exploded, sending shards of crystal and red wine spraying across the white tablecloth like a gunshot wound. The dark liquid dripped onto the floor, staining the carpet. No one moved to clean it up. $400 million, Preston choked out. The number was too big for his brain to comprehend. It was not just wealth. It was an abstraction. It was more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. And it belonged to the girl he had tormented for being poor. "Cash," I repeated. "Sitting in a trust account as we speak. I could buy this entire subdivision and bulldoze it tomorrow without checking my balance." Linda let out a low, keen sound, like a wounded animal. She looked at me, and I saw the realization hit her. She had kicked out a billionaire. She had treated the most powerful person she would ever know like a servant. "Ariel," she wailed. "Why didn't you tell us? We are family. We could have been part of it." "You were part of it," I said cold. "You were the motivation. Every time I wanted to sleep, I thought of you. Every time I wanted to quit, I remembered this kitchen. I remembered the manager's special cupcake. I remembered the golf clubs. You built this empire. Mother, you just don't get to live in it. But you have $400 million, Preston shouted, standing up, his face twisted with a mixture of greed and fury. You have all that money, and you are harassing us over $1 million that is pocket change to you. You are petty. You are sick. It is not about the money, Preston, I said calmly. It is about the principle. It is about the bills. I walked back to the table and placed a single sheet of paper on top of the gravy stain. Since you cannot pay the $1,200,000 you owe me, I said, and since the bank, which is me, has already issued the default notice, I am exercising my right under the deed of trust. I looked at Howard, then Linda, then Preston. This house is now the property of Nemesis Holdings. It is my house. Are you taking our home? Linda screamed. She stood up and lunged toward me, her hands reaching out to grab my arms. You cannot do this. This is where we raised you. This is our home. I stepped back, a smooth, practiced movement. She grasped at empty air. This is not a home, I said. It is a collateral asset. And it is a depreciating one. Ariel, please. Linda fell to her knees. It was a theatrical, pathetic gesture. She grabbed the hem of my cardigan. Please, I am your mother. I gave you life. You cannot throw us out on the street. It is Christmas. Have you no heart? I looked down at her. I looked at the woman who had sneered at my thrift store prom dress. I looked at the woman who had chosen golf clubs over my happiness. I looked at the woman who had watched me walk into a blizzard and turned up the volume on the TV. I felt a flicker of emotion, but it wasn't pity. It was disgust. Get up, I said. She looked up at me, mascara running down her cheeks. I said get up. She scrambled to her feet, sobbing. You have 48 hours, I said. I want this property vacated by midnight on December 26th. Anything left behind will be considered abandoned property and will be disposed of by my cleaning crews. 48 hours, Preston yelled. That is illegal. You have to give us 30 days. Read the fine print on the loan you signed 4 years ago. Preston, I said. The one with the predatory terms you didn't bother to read because you were so sure your crypto scheme would pay it off. It contains a confession of judgment clause and an accelerated eviction waiver in the event of default on a secondary lien. My lawyers have already filed the writ of possession. The sheriff will be here in 48 hours. If you're still here, you will be arrested for trespassing. You are a monster, Preston spat. No, I said. I am a businesswoman. Mom taught me well. I looked at Linda, who was now weeping into her hands. You told me that bills have to be paid, I said softly. You told me that if I was smart, I would pay my own. Well, Mother, I am very smart, and this is me collecting what is owed. Where will we go? Howard asked. His voice was a whisper. He looked broken. We have nowhere to go. I hear the Motel 6 on the interstate has weekly rates, I said. It is about $35 a night. I stayed there once. The heating is terrible, but it is affordable. I picked up my bag. I felt light. I felt clean. The suffocation that had started 10 years ago in this very room was finally gone. The air in my lungs felt crisp and new. Happy holidays, I said. I turned around and walked toward the door. Linda screamed my name again. A desperate, broken sound. But I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I opened the front door and stepped out into the night. The cold air hit me. But this time, I had a coat. I had a car. I had $400 million. And most importantly, I had the receipt. As I walked down the path, I heard the sound of Preston throwing something against the wall inside, followed by the crash of china. It was the sound of a kingdom falling. I got into the beige sedan, started the engine, and drove away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing back there worth seeing. The engine of the rental sedan hummed a steady, monotonous rhythm as I merged onto the interstate, leaving the subdivision of Oak Creek Drive behind in the darkness. I did not look at the rearview mirror. There was no need. The image of that house, with its peeling paint and the toxicity festering within its walls, was burned into my memory. But for the first time in 10 years, the memory did not hurt. It felt like a scar that had finally stopped itching. I drove back to the city in silence. I did not turn on the radio. I wanted to sit in the quiet, to feel the weight of the moment settling over me. I had dropped the bomb, but I would not stay to watch the explosion. That was the difference between revenge and justice. Revenge is messy and involves getting your hands dirty. Justice is clean, administrative, and best handled by professionals. 48 hours later. The deadline expired. I was not there when the clock struck midnight. I was in a spa on the Magnificent Mile, getting a deep tissue massage, but my team was there. I had hired a private security firm, the kind that specializes in high-risk corporate asset recovery. They arrived at 42 Oak Creek Drive at 1 minute past midnight on December 26th. They were accompanied by a team of movers and the county sheriff. Enforcing the writ of possession my lawyers had expedited through the courts. According to the report I received later, it was a chaotic scene. But brief. Linda had tried to barricade the door with the dining room chairs. Preston had screamed threats, claiming he knew senators and judges, shouting that he would sue everyone for harassment. Howard had simply sat in his armchair, weeping quietly, clutching a framed photo of a boat he had sold 20 years ago. It did not matter. The law is a cold machine, and I had fed it the correct paperwork. The movers were efficient. They packed the Winslow's personal effects into boxes, clothes, cheap furniture, the shattered remains of their dignity, and loaded them onto a truck. The locks were changed. The windows were boarded up. Security cameras were installed. By sunrise, the house was empty, silent, and mine. The Winslows did not end up on the street. I am not a sadist. I had instructed my lawyers to arrange a temporary landing for them, strictly to prevent them from using the homeless parents' narrative to the press. They moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a dilapidated complex on the south side of the city, an area known more for its potholes than its potential. The rent was paid by a combination of state welfare assistance and Howard's meager Social Security check. It was a stark drop from the suburban pretension they had clung to for so long. The walls were thin, the heating was loud. The neighbors did not care about Linda's pearls or Preston's vision. Preston's fall was the most precipitous. Stripped of the house equity he had planned to embezzle, and with his Apex Heritage scheme exposed as a fraud, he faced a choice: starvation or labor. The loan sharks he owed money to were not as litigious as I was. They were physical, to pay them back. Preston had to work. He applied for executive jobs. He was laughed out of the interviews. He applied for sales jobs. He failed the background checks due to his credit score. Eventually, gravity took hold. Preston Winslow, the golden boy who had once mocked me for cleaning dishes, took a job with the municipal sanitation department. He became a garbage collector. I saw him once, months later, from the tinted window of my limousine as I passed through the city. He was wearing a neon yellow vest, heaving a heavy black bag into the back of a crushing truck. His face was streaked with grime, and he looked exhausted. He looked older. He looked real. For the first time in his life, Preston was contributing something tangible to society. He was cleaning up a mess instead of making one. It was the most honest work he had ever done. As for the house on Oak Creek Drive, I had no intention of selling it. I did not want another family to inherit the ghosts of my childhood. 2 months after the eviction, the bulldozers arrived. I stood across the street, wearing a hard hat and a cashmere coat, watching as the yellow steel claw tore through the roof. It took 3 hours to flatten my childhood. The kitchen where I had been yelled at, the dining room where I had been extorted, the basement where I had frozen all of it was reduced to a pile of splintered wood and drywall dust. I did not feel sad. I felt like I was watching a tumor being removed. On that land, I did not build a monument to myself. I built a future. I used the funds from the Etherius Logic sale to establish the Next Gen Code Academy. It was a state-of-the-art community center designed specifically for underprivileged youth kids who, like me, had been written off by their families or the system. Kids who were told they were too poor, too weird, or too broken to succeed. We built a facility with floor-to-ceiling windows to let the light in. We filled it with the fastest computers money could buy. We hired compassionate mentors who taught Python, Java, and robotics, but who also taught self-worth. I made sure the heating system was top of the line. No child in my building would ever be cold again. The only time I saw my parents again was in a courtroom. 6 months after the eviction, they had found a lawyer, a strip mall ambulance chaser working on contingency, who convinced them they could sue me for elder abuse and predatory lending. They claimed I had tricked them into signing the documents, that I had manipulated the bank to target them. It was a desperate, flailing attempt to claw back some power. I walked into the courtroom flanked by 3 partners from the most prestigious law firm in Chicago. I wore a white suit, sharp and immaculate. My parents sat on the other side. Linda looked frail, her dyed hair grown out to reveal the gray roots. Howard was in a wheelchair. Preston was not there. He couldn't get the time off work. The hearing lasted 20 minutes. My lawyer presented the emails, the signed contracts, the recordings of Preston admitting the plan to defraud me, and the financial records showing I had legally purchased the debt. The judge, a stern woman with no patience for frivolity, looked at the evidence and then looked at my parents. Case dismissed with prejudice, she ruled. And I would advise the plaintiffs to be grateful the defendant is not countersuing for the legal fees, as she would be well within her rights to do. As we left the courtroom, Linda tried to catch my eye. "Ariel," she called out, her voice cracking, "we are your family. Doesn't that mean anything?" I stopped. I turned slowly to face them. I looked at the woman who had birthed me and the man who had ignored me. I searched my heart for hatred, for the burning rage that had sustained me through the freezing nights in the basement. It was gone. The fire had consumed all the fuel and burned itself out. All that was left was a deep, quiet pity. They looked so small. They were just 2 sad, aging people who had bet their lives on a lie and lost. They were not monsters. They were just weak, and their weakness could no longer hurt me. "It means we share DNA, Linda," I said softly. "But family is earned, and you went bankrupt on that account a long time ago." I turned and walked away, the click of my heels on the marble floor echoing like a metronome counting down the start of my new life. I returned to Chicago and threw myself into my next venture. I founded Helios Horizons, a clean energy firm dedicated to developing affordable solar technology for developing nations. I wanted to bring light to places that had been left in the dark. It was harder work than software, but it was fulfilling. I was no longer running away from something. I was running toward something. I also updated my estate plan. I sat with my attorney and drafted a will that was ironclad. Upon my death, 100% of my assets, which were now growing into the billions, would be liquidated and placed into a trust for the Next Gen Code Academy and various other charities supporting homeless youth. There was a specific clause regarding the Winslow family. It stated that not a single cent, not a single piece of property, and not a single share of stock would ever go to Howard, Linda, Preston, or any of their descendants. I wanted the cycle of toxicity to end with me. I would not fund their dysfunction from the grave. The final scene of this chapter of my life took place on the 1-year anniversary of the dinner. It was Christmas Eve again. I stood on the terrace of my penthouse, 70 stories above the city. The wind was whipping around the glass balustrade, but the heat lamps kept the air balmy and warm. Below me, Chicago was a tapestry of gold and amber lights, stretching out to the black void of Lake Michigan. I could see the arteries of the highway, the red and white streams of traffic. Somewhere down there, in a cramped apartment, my family was likely eating a meager dinner, blaming the world for their misfortune. Somewhere down there, a garbage truck was rumbling through an alley, driven by a man who finally learned the value of $1. And somewhere down there, in a bright, modern building on the site of my old trauma, a 12-year-old girl was sitting at a computer, writing her first line of code, realizing that she had the power to change her own reality. I held a glass of vintage Pinot Noir in my hand. It was smooth, complex, and tasted of dark cherries and victory. I took a sip and let the warmth spread through my chest. I had done it. I had survived the cold. I had survived the neglect. I had survived the betrayal. I had not just paid my bills. I had bought the whole damn ledger and rewritten the ending. I was alone on the terrace, but I was not lonely. Loneliness is the absence of people. Solitude is the presence of oneself. And I liked the woman I had become. She was tough, she was fair, and she was free. I looked up at the stars, shining clearly in the winter sky. They say money cannot buy happiness, I said to the wind, my voice calm and steady. Maybe that is true, but money can buy freedom. It can buy a fortress strong enough to keep the monsters out. It can buy the power to turn a house of pain into a house of hope. I smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. And to me, I whispered, raising my glass to the city that had forged me. That is the happiest ending of all. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope Ariel's journey resonates with you and reminds you that your past does not define your future. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Please leave a comment down below with your country or city. Let's see how far this story has traveled. If you enjoyed this tale of justice and resilience, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Blue Payback. Hit that like button and press the hype button to help this video reach more people who might need a little inspiration to pay their own bills and build their own empires. Stay strong, and see you in the next story.